Okay, so yesterday we covered 2, so today we're just going to practice with 3 additional examples of graphs. Again, remember, domain are your x values, the range are your y values. So when we list our domain and range, we're going to be listing it in interval notation. So for this first example, notice again, pretend like you're moving across your graph from left to right to find your x values. So the first thing I would encounter as I move across is the arrow. And again, don't get confused and think that this arrow is pointing to the infinity for the y's. It's also pointing you, think about it getting slanted a little, to the negative infinity for the domain. And then over here, this is going to also go to infinity. Down here is negative infinity for the range. So if I'm trying to describe my domain here, as I come across left to right, my domain first hits the negative infinity. Now notice as you're going across, it comes here, and then notice it hits this point, but then if you move up, remember domain is x, this solid circle takes over, and then the graph continues to infinity. So this domain is actually all real numbers, even though it looks like there's a little gap there. But where the gap is, the other line takes over. For the range, remember we're going to find it from bottom to top. And so for the range, we're going to go from the bottom and go up. The first point we come to is this 2. And notice it's an open circle, so I'm going to use a parentheses. And then from there, notice it goes to infinity. So it would cover every y value from 2 straight on up forever. Now, for the increasing, decreasing constant part of our graph, what we need to think of is don't look at the arrows, but sort of think of like each segment of this graph as like finding the slope of it. So notice this part right here, you can look like it has a negative slope. So whenever the line segment looks like it's got a negative slope, or the ray, then we know that this is decreasing. Then over here for this part, notice it's rising from left to right, or it looks like it has a positive slope. This would be the increase part. And then this, where it's flat, this is the constant part of the graph. Now, when we describe increasing, decreasing, constant, it's always coming from the domain. So we're always looking for x values. Now, when you go to check your homework, the answers that are listed in the solution file do have brackets on them. Remember, when we list them for our homework or our test or quiz, when we list increasing, decreasing, constant, we're only using parentheses. So now let's go ahead and figure out the interval notation for each piece of my graph. So for the decreasing part, which is this yellow, notice as I'm moving again for my x values, the first x value I encounter is going to be the arrow. So my decreasing is going to go from negative infinity, and then the place where it stops decreasing is right here at the 1, and it's an open circle, so I just use a parentheses. That's my decreasing. For the increasing, again, we're looking at x values, so you can see where it picks up here at 1, always parentheses, and then it increases until it gets here. So if I follow it down to get my x number, it increases until it hits the 3. And now the constant goes from the 3 and then to infinity. Always parentheses around decreasing, increasing, constant. Next example is from the homework. It's an even question. So again, let's look for our domain. Now, at first glance, you're thinking, oh, these arrows are pointing me down to negative infinity. But again, think about this graph as not only is it going down, but it's also getting wider and wider and wider, and eventually it's going to cover every x value. So the domain for this one is also all real numbers. So I'm going to write that from negative infinity to positive infinity. The range, however, remember it's the y values. For the range, we go from bottom to top. So notice the first bottom place I see something is here at negative infinity. And then the highest point my graph gets is right here at 3. And it's a bracket because it's a solid line. Now let's identify each piece of this as either increasing, decreasing, or constant. So for this side, what is this piece doing? Left to right. What kind of slope is that?
Increase.
Increase, good, because it's positive. What about the top of this?
Constant.
Good. And then this back side? Decreasing. So now we'll break up my all real number domain and give each one of these increasing, decreasing, constant its own little interval. So for the increasing, again, we're coming in this way. So it's going from negative infinity. The place where it stops increasing is right here at 1. Then for the decreasing, well, we could do the constant first. The constant is going to be constant from 1 up to the 4. And then it starts decreasing at 4 to infinity, negative or positive infinity. So again, it's the x values, that's why it's going to infinity. It looks like it's going down, but again, remember it's getting wider sideways. So because for the decreasing, the reason why it's positive infinity is it's the x values. So again, this line segment here, or this ray, is pointing it down. It looks like for the range it's going to negative infinity, but here it's going and getting bigger and bigger x values. So that's why it's positive infinity, because it's covering the x, not the y. This is number 78 from the homework. All right, so the domain here, it's coming across from the left. See the arrow, so it's negative infinity. But as I travel along here, notice I've got a little gap here, it's a hole. So I'm going to stop here at negative 3. I'm going to put a U for the hole, and then I'm going to jump over the hole, start up again on the other side at negative 3, and then go to infinity. Because even over here, see this solid circle? And it's matching with this one, and it takes over and goes to the infinity. So whenever there's a hole, you would write the hole right here. That would be your hole. So as I'm coming up my y-axis, the first y I encounter is 1 with a parenthesis because it's an open circle. And then notice it goes to infinity. Now let's identify our increasing, decreasing, and constant. So we can see that this part of the graph is doing what from left to right? Good. And then this part of the graph? Good. And then this part of the graph? Increase. So let's break up this domain and let's put in all the values. So for the increasing part, it's going to be this piece right here. So it's going to increase from 3 to infinity. That's the increase. For the decrease, we're coming in here from negative infinity, and then we stop decreasing at negative 3. For the constant part, it starts being constant at negative 3, and it ends at positive 3. And again, remember, increasing, decreasing, and constant, we're always just gonna use parentheses.